welcome back to another very special episode of the Film Alchemist podcast, the show where we look at movies we love, break them apart, to find out what gives them their magic. I'm your host, Josh Griffey, joined as always by my friend, co-host, and hairless, naked, underground rodent monster.
I don't know who that is, but my name's Alex Dandino.
Amir, my friend, Amir. No, I'm just kidding. All right, guys, before we start today's documentary, The Paul Gets Real Deep Dive, a little business, guys. We're on patreon.com, patreon.com/Film Alchemist Pod. It's the absolute best way to support the show. Today's episode, along with this entire month's curation, was actually selected by one of our Highlander level patrons. Guys, for as little as $1 a month, you can dip your toes in, see what's going on over there, get to know the community, communicate with us more. And as you go up the tiers, guys, you'll get discounts on merch, and you'll be able to start picking your own episodes. It's a lot of fun, man. The patrons we have, we adore them. You guys will love them, too. So for those of you who support us already, thank you. For those who are about to, thank you as well. Again, patreon.com/Film Alchemist Pod. Please, please, we have kids to feed, please. All right, well, we'll try that method, too. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Film Alchemist. Over on YouTube, you can see video version of most of our pods there, along with some other stuff that we have cooking up. We have plans always. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you find the show. Quick 5-star, quick sentence or two about why you enjoy spending time with us. Helps us defeat the algorithmic, just nihilistic philosophies of life. You can email the show, filmalchemistpod@gmail.com, and find us on all the social media that you're on. All right. Enough of that business. Let's get down to nonsense. No, I'm just kidding. The pod gets real.
Cold, hard facts.
Yeah. From friend, patron, Heath Benfield, the pod gets real. This has been a fascinating challenge. Alex and I are always up for a challenge. We've done a lot of movies. These are our first documentaries, and it's a different beast, guys. So we're having fun with this.
Documentaries.
We hope that you are. Guys, today we're talking about Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. This is Errol Morris written and directed, correct?
Yes, Errol Morris written and directed. Technically not written because it's a documentary. I always have trouble as a person who actually works in a lot of these. The thing that when people say like it was written, I'm like, that literally defeats the purpose of a documentary.
Well, you can tell some documentaries that they put lines in their subjects' mouths.
Sure.
I assume writing is, in the editing process.
That's what I always assume. Like, right? Yeah. I worked on a documentary where the editor was credited as a writer, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, sure. Very weird credit, though. But yeah, Errol Morris, 1997. So this is a much older film. Shot on film. Shot by Robert Richardson, who everyone else knows is the man, the myth of Quentin Tarantino, one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite DPs. He shot Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2, Inglourious Bastards, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yep.
Holy shit, man.
He has
From
a story
humble beginning. I mean, honestly, though, this movie is beautifully shot, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, for those of you who haven't seen this, right, you can find it. Go find it, guys. It is worth a watch. It's an interesting documentary, and it's one of those things I think Errol Morris does really well, right? Which I think his first big one that he became really successful for was Thin Blue Line, right?
Thin Blue Line, yeah.
Yeah, that was a big, and that's a very serious, piece, right? Mm-hmm. What I love about this one is that it's essentially this think piece on the human condition and the great question of our lives, which is, what is the fucking purpose of all of this, right? As seen through these 4 strange men. And it's one of the fun things about a documentary is you just find these weird guys. And I mean, not that they're like insanely strange, but they would be one of the strangest guys you know.
I mean, I can tell you, there's not a lot of movies out there about lion tamers. I'll say that.
Yeah.
So
that motherfucker. We'll talk about him in a minute. But what I think is really fun, right? What Errol Morris does well is he weaves this tale that is, it's just this epic question, essentially, is what is the point of this? What are we doing? And these 4 disparate stories of 4 men, right? 3 of whom were following literal childhood obsessions, right?
Yeah.
And the 4th guy who just cuts branches, right? But he loves it still. Just it wasn't like his childhood obsession.
He's a topiary artist.
Topiary artist. Yeah, but it wasn't like the other 3. It was a childhood fascination. And they felt as if it had made them weird and outsiders and this and that. So you watch these 4 disparate tales coming at this question of why from all of these different angles, but it melds so perfectly and seamlessly through the narrative. And I think there's a lot of great filmmaking and visual techniques to help kind of mine those, like a naked mole rat, you're mining those extra meanings and those extra symbolisms and bits that make this way more than it seems on first glance.
Yeah, I mean, on first glance, for me, it is a documentary about 4 people that have like nothing to do with each other. But that's what Errol Morris does really well. Like, I like Errol Morris as a filmmaker. Like, he's made a lot of really interesting documentaries.
Producer on The Act of Killing. He's one of the
I can't remember
granddaddies.
if this was the first one he used this technique. It probably isn't, but his interview technique is very specific. Like, whenever you're watching an Errol Morris movie, you know you're watching an Errol Morris movie because all the subjects face the camera. Mm-hmm. There's a very specific look that everybody has, and they look directly into the camera when they're telling their stories.
Yeah.
My first, actually, the first thing I ever saw from Errol Morris was a documentary series he did for HBO called First Person, where a man told a story of crash landing a plane, like a commuter jet with like 40 people on it.
Good Lord.
And again, like the whole thing, like there was some B-roll and everything, but all of it was taking place like him just staring at the camera and telling the story. And it was absolutely harrowing. Very different from what we watched Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, but still very effective techniques, very interesting way to tell a story. And I think ultimately, the weaving of the narratives being like 4 completely disparate things that have nothing to do with each other and disparate people who end up kind of running the same gamut of self-discovery, I guess. Is that a way to put it?
I think it's self-discovery for us, because it's funny, we both mentioned that this is lighter fare than his other movies. This movie's literally dealing with the most epic and confounding question that a human being will ever ponder, right? So while it seems very surface, right, we're just watching these weird guys, right? Mm-hmm. That's what he does so well, right? Is because, like you said, they seem very disparate, right? To me, they're all these different stages, right? The guy who wants to explain us through science. The guy who wants to connect us to nature, the man who wants to defeat nature, right? And the man who wants to be, essentially like a movie star kind of thing, right? He's creating his own myth. So you see these 4 different ways with which people kind of tackle these things. And at the end, all we are left with is nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing. I think that a lot of documentaries would force down our throats that there needs to be a nice, tight ending to this movie. And I think what this is just saying, right? I think the gardener says it, and it's the line of the movie. He's like, it's just cut and wait. That's all you do. And I was like, that's what we all do. And I think that's what's so brilliant is because the technique he used a lot that I loved, right, is you would have the mole rat guy who is Ray, right? Ray would be talking about the politics of the mole rat, right? How they have to uniformly like roll in each other's pee or else you'd be seen as an alien, an outsider. And then you show circus folk, right? Yep. While he's speaking. Or you show the topiary artist as Dave, Dave's the trainer, right? Rodney is the robot scientist, right?
George is the topiary artist.
Right. So you see George working on these things, talking about how he has to still do it by hand. If you do it with machinery, it loses its intricacies and shape, right? And then you cut to B-roll of him, and the next person who talks is the robot scientist, Rodney, talking about how in the future these machines will be ever present in our lives. And those blending of watching one man stuck in this part of a life and then talking about this vast future, you immediately in your mind, you can't process the image with what's being said. You know that that topiary artist doesn't have a place in the future this guy envisions, and vice versa. And so I think it's those crossovers that work perfectly, even when they're contradictory, that just meld this all together.
I mean, I think that's what this movie does so effectively and fascinatingly is juxtaposing a different person's interview with a different person's B-roll. Like that, I think, is probably the thing that's most interesting and most effective from a visual standpoint is like when you're watching this, and again, like you and I are very different. We watch a lot of movies. I love watching documentaries. Like a lot of
Love
them,
them.
like they're just really fascinating. Like I said last week on the act of killing, like to me, documentary filmmaking is the last like bastion of like pure, so to speak. There's just like this unknowable about documentary filmmaking that you just can't get with narrative. Like, you know, we've seen so many crazy things in narrative films, and yet still real life is so insane.
Yeah,
so when
well,
you see
I mean,
stuff like this-
documentaries haven't been Save the Catted to death, you know,
No.
studio executive to death. Like, they have their
Right.
own unique rhythms at times,
and
which I
Aaron
feel like
Morris
we've
particularly
lost.
has his
Yes,
own unique rhythm.
absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, to me, that's what makes this movie interesting is to watch. That's the melding. That's the interweaving between these stories. Is like you realize that while all these people seem very different, they're really very much the same. Like all of us are, and then like we all sort of lump ourselves into this story, and that's what I like about documentary filmmaking is we all end up assigning ourselves a piece of this story, and like. There's absolutely like that's the thing that I think makes great documentaries versus like good documentaries or not great documentaries is when you watch a documentary and you see not yourself but you see a piece of something that you latch onto and that not that you necessarily have an opinion on but you feel in your core might get you in some way. Like there's something about that that touches you in a way that you're
Right.
not expecting but you know is part of your life. And that's what this is so much that's what this functions so well with is all of us are these people. We just don't do these fantastic things, but we do something similar to it. It's our lives on display, whether we like it or not. It's very interesting.
Well, everyone was a kid in school, and you remember your history teacher bringing in the rolling TV cart, and you're like, fuck. And you'd watch a PBS thing like, Life under the Pioneer, right? Watch this lady dip a candle wax. And you're like, this is so fucking boring. And they just present everything as like, well, in 1982, the sun would rise at 4, and we'd be out spanking cows by 4:30. And you're like, wait, I want to talk about that. Nope, we can't. Now it's cracker breakfast. And you're like, what? And that's just how it would go for an hour.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm so bored that the information can't hit. I don't relate to those people as other like pioneer humans. I relate to them as these things that are killing my mind in history class. Right. And that's why things like this, like I don't have a ton in common with the guy who's like making robots, but when you think about it, right? Like there's something he said that really struck me when he's like, I love the idea of how evolution builds upon what it's already done, right?
Yeah.
The inside of us is a lizard brain. Inside of the lizard's brain is a fish brain. And it could just be all bullshit. I'm probably not as smart as him to dissect what he's saying, but I like that.
By the way, none
idea.
of us are as smart as the guy who builds robots. I'm just going to say that right. Unless
let's
you
put
build
that-
robots.
unless
then
you
you're
are.
very smart.
And if you're that smart and you stumbled upon the show, I apologize. And I wish you all the best in your future podcast endeavors. Because I'm just sitting here talking about spanking cows and shit. But what I'm saying is I like the idea of, because I think that's what is really fascinating to me, right? Like one of the major through lines is the naked mole rat expert, right? Who's talking about the way that these naked mole rats are this absolute anomaly in nature, that they function like they're a mammalian creature that functions like an insect would, right?
Right.
This greater collective. And he has this great analogy where he says they are the equivalent of a person, like let's say a human being's like they're locked in a room, right? And they have a colony. And the queen dies, and they're like, now we need someone who's 6'5", and they look at the person who's 5 feet tall, and they're able to grow to be 6'5" and fill their role in society.
Right.
And they use this through line to show how we are also like that, right? We have a very hive mentality. At times they do a lot of B-roll to the circus audience. Mm-hmm. And then we see the robot, which is very insect-like. So the insects and the robots and the mole rats and us, we all have these things in common. And so it just gets to this core of maybe this is just life, right?
Yeah.
And I would say at the other end, you have the lion tamer and the topiary artist, right? They're kind of the men fighting against nature. They don't want to explore it or explain it. They want to dominate it.
Yeah.
But even that becomes this intro, because that's when the film would switch POV, right? So you have this, we're trying to understand, and the robot scientist is very nihilistic, right? Like, what is the point of all this? Maybe we won't be in the future, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the robot scientist is very much like this. It is very much this, like, I've already seen Skynet. I know where this is going. So like, he's like, I'm just going to invent Skynet now.
Did you think he was actually really when he talked about the mini robots that just wipe his TV? I was like, this guy's like a serial killer. That's such a weirdly specific thing to fantasize about.
You know what's funny? I've been watching Batman. I've been watching Batman the animated series with the kid, and do you remember like Heart of Steel, like the episodes with the robots? Mm-hmm. So all I could think, I was like, did he like build Hardak? Is that what's going on? Is he like that fucking? Is he that fucking farmer guy?
I don't know. I'd be more worried the way that he was talking about those robots that he was building hard on. But
well, there's also that.
Neither here nor there. That
he might have very well been the first guy to build a real doll.
Well, they had some amazing shots of him where he's just like slack-jawed staring into the distance.
Yeah.
Right? Like they ponder this. There's a like B-roll of this old fucking vintage robot movie, and he's just like. And I was like, is that arousal or confusion or deep thinking? Like,
perhaps both.
Errol Morris asked us to do a lot of work, right? We are weavers at the the loom of this narrative.
At the loom of this narrative, because again, that's what the documentary, particularly Errol Morris documentaries, ask us to do, is the work. And I like that. Like the Lion Tamer telling the story about the wristwatch. That was like one of those things where I was like, this is a really interesting. Like, because he was talking about like you learn valuable, like there's like when you make a bigger error, you learn you make errors to learn lessons. That's how I learn lessons. He's like, sometimes you make tremendously terrible errors. Like I made an error that gave me 3 months in the hospital. And it's one of those things where you're like, and again, this is a guy who tames lions for a living. And I've never had an interest in that. That seems really dangerous and stupid.
Zero.
But I thought about that and I was like, I guess there are like I have those things in my life too. Like everything circles back in this documentary to being about your own situation. Like you might not have a lion tamer situation, but all of us have made those mistakes that end up haunting us for like years, months, days, decades, whatever it is. Like I can think back to when I was a kid and a mistake I made that still makes me feel uncomfortable. Still makes me think like, wow, I did like learn a very valuable lesson at that moment. Like, that's what I think that's what a lot of these guys, like just little interpersonal stories do. Because I like the guy who with the mole, Ray Mendez, the mole rat expert, I found him very interesting. He was very like, you could not build a nerdier guy in a lab. Like if you were like trying to build the nerdiest guy ever.
Evolution peaked with that one.
But like, that was like what was interesting. And again, this is the documentary doing its work, is like, I was watching Ray and I'm like, I don't relate to Ray, but his stories are very interesting to me. Mm-hmm. But like the robot, but the, and I don't relate to George, but Rodney and Dave, like they have stories that have relevance to my life, even though I've never done either of those things. And I find them both incredibly impressive people. It's interesting that like the cherry picking that goes on in my brain when I'm watching the documentary. And then at the end, I realize like all of them are pretty much doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. They're just doing it. They're all just operating in very different realms of science for themselves. Like it's the science of risk for the lion tamer. And it was all just very fascinating. Like I did not expect to pull what I pulled out of it when I started the movie.
That's funny you mentioned science, because I was more fascinated. There's kind of a magic to this movie, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, what I think that I was settling on, right, is they talk about this, all of their pursuits, right? And they keep coming back to this, what is the value of all this? And I felt like the movie constantly showed me, because, again, I think George is kind of a sad story in this, right? It's just like, hey, make this magical thing just at the behest of this old benefactor lady, right? Right. And there's something kind of sad about that. He has this line that really just fucking smacked me upside the head, where him and his wife are in, like, the servants' quarters or wherever they live. And he's like, they spent $44 on a scarecrow hat. And the scarecrow looks like George. Yeah. And she goes, she thinks I'm worth $44. And I'm like, well, George, she could have given you the $44 instead of the stupid hat. Yeah. And it's one of those, it just kind of, but he's just a guy who had this mission. He's like, I just see it in my head and I go about doing it. And so what I found is that the movie's asking a lot of questions and then trying to answer them with the other characters, right? Mm-hmm. So when they say, what is the point of all this, right? Silicon Life might replace us. What are we doing here? George is what we're doing here, right? Is that the fact that what makes us different from a robot or from these naked mole rats is that we have Georges out there that for no rhyme or reason and not enough reward, not enough praise, he's just out there making the world this very beautiful place, right? He is taking around him and making it beautiful, right? Whereas the naked mole rats are just evolutionarily sleek, right? They lost their hair, they don't sweat, all the shit he tells us. But they're just functioning, right? They're rolling around in piss to just keep themselves maintained, right? The robots are just processing their simple functions. George is out here creating magic and beauty. And so I think what he's saying is that, you know, that's what we do. And I think that's why they use that in a lot of B-rolls of the circus. Because I have to stop and talk about this. I fucking hate circuses. And I think they are...
Same.
I think they are the fucking worst. And I watched it and I was like, this is just so sad and pathetic. And I hate it.
It made me depressed. Like,
so depressed.
The romanticized version of like circus acts and circuses in general is so, especially in this movie. Like, I agree. I was watching them set up the lion cage, and I'm like, this demystifies a lot of like coolness that was ever associated. Yeah. I don't think I agree. Like, I think circuses are terrible. That it like demystifies so much. You're like, wow, it's literally just like a cage.
Well, this is what I'm saying, right?
Like a collapsible cage.
Yeah, take the fucking... Because I was fascinated by the human cannonball and the ladies doing that balance beam on the fucking exercise balls. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That's cool. I don't need to see the fucking tortured I don't need to see the fucking analog VHS Tiger King over here fucking cracking whips. He's got a pistol on his hip.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those like, well, he might have to shoot a tiger in front of the captive audience. And I was like, honestly, you deserve to get fucking mauled.
Was that... I thought that was just a starter pistol.
I mean, it might be, but...
Because there's the scene where he actually fires it. I think it's just to scare the lion.
I thought that was like an extra, like, cinematic, like he walks into the sunset and shoots it. That's like when we're talking about him retiring.
Right.
But
no, I think that either... It doesn't really matter.
Anywho, because, I mean, this is a man who's just crafted himself after this terrible serial character, right? Claude Rains or whatnot. He took his whole... I don't know if that's the name.
It was Baru?
No, that's the little wild child in the movie.
Right. Oh,
that was a weird thing.
That was the movie. That was the title of the movie, wasn't it?
Right. But yeah.
I know you were talking about that.
Darkest Africa was the serial.
That's
and Baru was the son of the mission. Anywho, that's a lot to know about Darkest Africa. But I looked at it, and that part honestly just made me mad.
Yeah.
Because they kept showing the B-roll of this tiger and lion fighting viciously. And they showed bears doing this thing, and they showed elephant, and he's kind of the anti-George to me, right? Whereas George is creating this fucking magic from the earth, right? George is like Swamp Thing. He's the keeper of the green. He's one with nature.
Knew that was coming.
Yeah, whoever Dave is, right? He starts off, and I liked him, right? The priest told him against his parents' wishes, hey, the world needs lion tamers too. And I was like, that's a great sentiment.
Yeah.
And then you watch him in practice, and you're like, he's just this douche fucking abusing animals, and I'm not impressed by their fucking tricks. I'm just watching. So you see the circus scenes, right? As they talk about us as like a hive of naked mole rats in the crossover. And that part made me sad, right? He is taking magic and cheapening it to such an extent that then you want the robot guy's thing to come true and us to be replaced, right? So there's always some kind of like battleship style juxtaposing of these. You know, there's two science and two magic, one good, one dark. In both, and I fucking hated, because that's what I mean, like, are the people doing amazing physical feats not enough?
No, yeah.
I mean, I know they just exist on TikTok now, so, I mean, I don't know why we need the abused animals in the tents.
Yeah, like, the lion taming is a really interesting, it's sort of an anomaly in the doc, like, because the rest of these guys are doing things that actually service anything, like, topiary services... It's relaxing.
One old
in
lady.
Regards.
Yeah, it services one old lady.
And then anybody who's just like passersby, like it's that kind of thing that like.
Yeah, I think you can go walk through the gardens for.
But it serves like it's called Green Animals Topiary Garden. It's in.
It adds magic to the world. You would take your family there, and you would look and be like, there is something beautiful in this world. Yes.
Ray is adding to the world, even though he's studying, naked mole rats. He's still adding to the world. He's learning.
He's teaching us to not look at things at skin level and accept differences, and that's valuable. Robots are valuable.
Rodney is bringing about the apocalypse by
and Rodney's cosplaying the lamest fucking cereal ever and abusing animals. and Rodney can fucking suck it. That's how I felt watching the movie.
Yeah, like I said, the Lion
And he was
Tamer
pretty shitty too. He's like, well, they replaced me with a younger broad. Hopefully she doesn't get moited by her and then you're watching her, and there was a scene, and I was like, honestly, fuck her too. Because there was a scene with the new trainer where she hugs a tiger, and the tiger kind of rests its chin on her, and you're like, all right, like maybe she's like bonding more with him. Nope, she pulls back and fucking, remember that movie How High?
Yeah.
Right, with Method Man and Redman, he goes, powder, bitch, and he would get like baby powder in his hand to smack. That was like a high school absolute comedy cornerstone for me in the wrestling team.
Right.
Was powder, and that's what she did to the tiger. She fucking bitch smacks this tiger right in the face, and all I could think was, eat her. There's 5 of you. Fucking eat her.
Well, he has a lot of these, like, he has this whole section in the movie where he talks about, like, having to get, like, if you get hit or injured by one of the cats, you have to get back up.
The psychology of not letting them know that they're
stronger. The psychology of them not knowing that you're a weaker animal, even though you are. And, like, it's a really tragic thing because, like, to me, so I don't like going to it's like people who go surfing, people go out into the ocean, that kind of thing. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, the ocean hates us. We shouldn't be in it anyways.
Yeah,
like,
it keeps throwing you back. It does not want you.
Literally, it's literally waving you back into itself.
You're like, I'm here again. It's like, it throws you back to the sand.
But that's what's kind of crazy is, like, all these guys, like, everyone but Dave is understanding that nature is volatile.
Yeah.
And not trying to control it, but just understand it on their level. Dave's the only one who's trying to not just control, but dominate nature. But then by saying...
I think that's the difference, right? It's not control, because that's what they're all this is domination, right? This is a cheapening and a lessening of life, right? You see these animals, and they are just these fucking ghostly shells.
Yeah.
Right? And they're not majestic, and they're not beautiful like they should be in their natural form.
Right.
And I think Dave represents this cheapening, right? And in a way, he does serve a purpose because Dave is essentially the avatar for the myths and stories we tell ourselves, right? Dave is the man who fails to be humbled by this vast experience, right?
Right.
And the psychology of Dave is very interesting. He goes to work every day knowing that he's weak compared to these beasts, and he has to maintain this facade. So every day he's living a lie in a way. And he's passing that lie off to us. And he said one thing that really struck me. He's like, when I'm in the cage, right, it doesn't matter if there's 5 or 5,000 people out there. It's me and my world. And I was like, the fucking narcissistic strokeness of that conversation, right? The way he's just like, you're just like, when he goes to town, he's going to get his little whip out and his little chair and like tame himself, you know what I mean? What's it? Ooh, naughty, it's Tuesday. And it's just ridiculous. This guy is I feel bad hating on this guy.
But I love how anytime this goes for any movie we watch, though. I love how anytime we run into these characters which are just like narcissists galore. These people who have no business in like normal society or like interacting with other people. We always assume their like private life is them just like sadly masturbating to themselves.
Are you saying that I'm projecting?
No, you're a perfectly adequate member of society.
Let me tell you, as an expert at... No, I'm just kidding. But I just say, I mean, imagine this motherfucker. Imagine Dave at a barbecue. He's probably the most insufferable. Well, one time I was wrestling a tiger.
He's that like, one-upper guy.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
who he is. He's the one-upper.
Really? Yeah, your kid did something cool at T-ball? Sweet. Let me tell you about the time I cracked a lion tusk. And you're like...
He's that guy who you're telling a T-ball story, and then he's the guy who says, I got that beat. And it's like, wasn't a competition. I don't even know why you'd say that.
If I'm being honest, none of these people seem wildly fun to have at the gathering. Right? But... At least, I mean, we need people like these, right? You need me on that wall.
At least Rodney clean the TV.
Yeah, right? Rodney shit someday vacuumed my floor. He called that one 100% right.
Yeah.
The integration of this intelligence all across the board. But I think I like that the movie never settles on anything. I want to ask you about this, though. What did you make of the B-roll movie, right? Because I kind of got what they were doing with Darkest Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are men venturing out into the edges of science and this and that, right? Experience, fine. Then they add the robot B-roll. He used a lot of B-roll, and a lot of times he match cuts it with then B-roll from the circus or the garden, but it's in black and white to match the film he was showing. What did you make of that technique?
For me, it represents what I think Errol Morris is trying to say throughout the movie, which is that all of this blends together into one seamless narrative, which is that all of us are trying to, in the face of progress, in the face of existence, all of us are just trying to maintain. So like for me, I think for it all to become the same black and white 8mm look just makes it all relevant. Everything becomes relevant, even stuff that would never affect you, like lion taming, naked mole rats, a topiary garden, or little bug robots. Like, no matter what, it all becomes part of our lives. Like, whether you like it or not, some aspect of that will enter your life at some time. I'm not saying I'm going to be a lion tamer, but I certainly am someone who, you know, anytime you get on a fucking airplane, you're facing death. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, you're like, there is this level of, you're not trying to dominate it, of course. You're in a fucking metal tube in the sky. It's your business. But like, to me, the blending of all those things into one look makes it all, it's part of your existence. It doesn't question, you're not questioning it, because like, I had the same thing. I was like, was this all shot? Then like, I know,
yeah, like why the
wasn't.
robot? Like I was like, is this a Rob Zombie music video? Like, what are we doing this cutaway for?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I feel like he's just saying all of it's the same. Like we're not, nothing is, everything's special and nothing's special.
Well, because it makes sense for Dave, the lion tamer, right? Because he literally just tried to make himself the man in that film, right?
Right. Well, that's like the first B-roll we see in the movie is the
Baru. But when they added the robot, I thought that was kind of strange, because the footage of the robots that Rodney makes is cooler than...
That's awesome.
And then I was like, maybe the whole point is to show a humanoid anthropomorphized robot to connect it to... Because I think Rodney's story actually was the most interesting to me. Because I feel like on the spectrum, I would fall between Rodney and topiary guy. Right? Like, I appreciate science and the learning and this and that, but also I just want to be confronted by the, you know, magic and beauty and shit.
Right.
But he has this thing. He said when he was a kid, right, he was fascinated with the idea of turning on a machine and watching it come to life, right?
Right. So
he's the one that really represents this God mind. Right, that he loves the power of this creation and seeing what it is. And he had this moment where he starts talking about the hardest thing is creating the basics, right? Is creating the moving and hunting and this and that. Once you do that, he goes, higher intelligence is easy. And that really struck me, right? It's there's this famous Ray Bradbury short story. I can't remember what the title is, but it's in the book The Illustrated Man. If you haven't read that, it's really good. And so the story is these two priests go to Mars and they're going to, like, you know, bring Jesus to Mars. And what they find essentially these glowing blue balls, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, they're not human, but they have conscience. And they're trying to debate with, like, how these things can, like, they can foist God into these gelatinous whatevers. But one of the things they discuss in that is they're like, the amoeba is the perfect creature. It just floats around and exists, right? Once it evolves and you give it arms, it's able to strangle, right? When you give it legs, it can chase something down. When you give it teeth, it'll bite and kill and hurt, right? And when you give it a brain, it has desires and pleasures that must be sated. And I like that idea that this guy he hasn't quite figured out that that's what he's doing, right? Is he's doing this work that will eventually become just another us, right? And if that necessarily, will it be content just to clean his TV? He does mention that there might not be room in the future for humans. But I was really struck by that idea. What did you make of Rodney, the roboticist?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's, in a weird way, Rodney's almost the most human of all of them. Like, I mean, so to speak. I'm not really sure how to put it, but like, well, I'll put it this way. For me, Rodney represents this, Rodney is this person who's in constant pursuit of the upper levels of humanity, but he's using the building blocks of life, like the lower level brain parts that we all function on, to explore what it takes to make existence. Not to birth a child or anything like, but literally what it is to create existence and let it live. Like the amoeba analogy is perfect. That Illustrated Man story is a great example. Like, yeah, like what can I do to create something that just exists? it exists without not necessarily purpose, but then in some form that in some way is a human anyways.
Yeah.
We just come into this world. We're not assigned a purpose.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's the most human experiment of all is like, how far can I go?
Well, it's also, too, right? You give us all these things, right? And then you get Daves who use it to hurt and abuse, right? And fucking play Tiger King. And then you get Georges who use it to make something beautiful.
Right.
And that's the thing the movie's always grappling with is what is the net benefit of us, right? And maybe that we need to stop thinking like Rodney and just accept moments of beauty as they come. And that's a little nihilistic for a lot of films, right? I'm assuming if you took this to most studio execs, they'd be like, ooh, not quite my favorite. And it is. It's just that concept. Rodney's even the one who coins the title, right? The Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control was essentially an essay they wrote about how they would swarm the solar system with robots.
Right.
And the theory being is that human life is valuable and it takes a long time to grow a human. And robots are easier to mass produce, and that's why they'd be beneficial. I'm looking at you, Blade Runner 2049, but we'll have that debate on another show. But robots are vastly advantageous in that way, right? That's common sense. Blade Runner 2049. Again, neither here nor there. But what he says is he'd send them out to these planets, and they would just swarm them with these, thousands, millions, myriad, legion little robots, right? And if one found something good, the others would go do that. And you wouldn't worry about all the little sunk cost of the little lost ones, right? Because they would just swarm and overwhelm the environment and get the job done. And you're listening to that while looking at the circus, and you're like, yeah, man, that's all we did. We just flooded the fucking zone. And I think because I think if you're watching this, right, you probably find the guy you latch onto. Like, who's my guy? Right? And I think, sadly, Rodney was my guy, and it made me a little sad. And I think by the end, I was like, I need to be a little more George in my life.
Yeah, see, I think that's like the bigger thing is we all want to be George. Everybody wants to be this like tranquil person who's shaping and accepting beauty as it comes into the world.
Just creating a nice, great work.
And not in a destructive manner either, just creating things from the way that they occur naturally. But we're all much more closer to Rodney. Like, I'm not sure anybody necessarily is Ray. I mean, I'm not. It's a really hard,
Ray he's a scientist, but he's
an observer.
He's happy to observe, right?
He's an observer, which is fine. There's
the
plenty
other
of watchers
people
in the world.
are more hands-on, right? He's just happy to be like, look, we are all capable of more.
Right. I feel like the Daves of the world are a dime a dozen. We all know there's Daves in the world, and they all are terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Not the name Dave, this Dave. There's many Daves I find delightful. Not this one, though.
That's true.
But like the most important thing to me, though, is all of us are trying to be George all the time. Mm-hmm. Most of us are Rodney, though. We're all progressing towards this inevitable end.
Well, it's hard, too, because, you're a writer, I'm a writer, we make podcasts, we're always trying to create stuff, right? So in that manner, you're always trying to channel George, which is what I think about all the time, especially as I get older, my main thought in life is I'm like, I would just love to add something of value and beauty to this world, right?
Agreed.
And just like something that maybe someday my kids, when I'm gone, they can come back to it and be like, man, that's really cool. Like, I connect on a, deep level with my father and maybe grandkids and whatever. Because you think about, you pick up these books, right? And these were great, famous men of their times. And to you, they're just a couple letters on a cover. They're not real humans to us. Right. So the vanity of I'm going to create a great work and be immortal is just such a fucking joke, right? You hear Charles Dickens, and it's like, all right, what's the first thing that pops in your head when you hear Charles Dickens?
Right. It's
not Charles Dickens, right? It's his works or a title or a character.
It's David Copperfield. It's
Christmas Tiny Carol, Tim, whatever. And he's become this abstract thought the same as any of his characters. So the fact that someone like George can keep going and not let that inevitability of the kind of pointlessness of every pursuit we can get into scare us is really the benefit of our species, right? And that the Rodneys of the world who are like, I will find this problem. In a way, Rodney's trying to conquer the entire mortality of us and the uselessness of us. in the way that Dave is pointing a chair at a fucking great and majestic beast. And that's also just kind of fucking pointless, right? Like, you know, I guess that's the question is I would love to know, like, different viewers. I just walk away being like, look for those small moments, man. That's all we fucking get.
That's it. I mean, that's really kind of like, I think that's the takeaway from the movie itself is just like these moments where you find this, whatever your elation is, hopefully it's not as destructive as caging and taming lions. But like, to me, again, we all want to be George. We all want to have that moment of feeling really good about snipping something away and making something beautiful.
Yeah. And George even says, he's like, I don't know what'll happen when I'm gone, right? And that's a really bummer. I think that's almost the last shot of the movie is just him working on a bush. And it's like, what will happen when the Georges are gone, right? And we're just stuck with, you know, cosplaying fucking heroes or, you know, whatever the fuck, right? These cosplaying, you know, I'm going to defeat fucking animals and prove that I'm the big dick swinging. Or Rodney's who are like, I will turn us into functional machines. Yep. Or, you know, Ray who's just like, look, evolution will handle it, right? It's shockingly glib for a movie that that's maybe how I'd sum it up, right? Yeah. It's a movie that reaffirmed and made me want to kind of soak up the fact that I'm a part of this weird fucking unexplainable thing. Yeah. But also feel very hopeless and like there's no point to any of that. So it really leaves you in a real fucked scenario.
There's a certain existential crisis you should come to by the end of this movie.
Yeah. And then you're like, 5 days from now, like, green animals will be out of my mind. George will be forgotten and unappreciated again. It's a really fucking weird place, but I think that's what I will take away, right, is that this movie, one, the fact that it remains entertaining, right, because it seems like this would get boring just constantly hearing these guys blab on about their pursuits, right?
Yeah.
But it's the fact that through his techniques of matching them together, they're actually all building together. We're not putting their different points of views at odds or whatever. No. We're just listening to people who are unique characters talk about what it's like for all of us. And the weirdness of what they're doing is just a little extra flavor. And through the techniques of, you know, his matching and blending, it just becomes this beautiful porridge, right? And I quite enjoy it. It's funny, I was telling you, I was assigned to watch this in college, and I fucking hated it. Like, I watched it in my class, and our professor's like, what'd you guys think? And we're like, total fucking horseshit. I hate this movie. What a waste of my time. I don't care about fucking mole rats. I don't care about fucking gardening. Like, I want to watch, you know, sorority girls get decapitated like a real fucking college
Dave.
Kid. Yeah, like a real Dave. Want to go point sticks at people and whip, you know, whatever. But I watched it today, and it just hit me absolutely right. Maybe I'm able to be a little more introspective, obviously, now than College Grip was. But I found it a really awesome view, man. I quite enjoyed it, and I think there's something too. A lot of documentaries cover, you know, by their nature, very important and heavy subject matters. Mm-hmm. And there are documentaries I know that people are like, you should watch it. I'm like, oh man, that's a lot. Like, I don't know if I can take on the extra, you know, like that. I'll be gone when the morning comes or dark comes.
I'll be gone in the dark. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that was like, you had to get psyched up. Like, all right, I'm ready to watch one. And then when you watch one, you're like, why am I watching this? I think it's great that this documentary has such amazing weight and heft without necessarily all of that extra difficult shit.
I don't disagree. It's the charm of Errol Morris.
He's just unbelievable. That's it for Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. That's it for you, Dave. If I ever find you were getting in the octagon, I'm going to whip your ass and fucking hit you with a chair, Dave. You little sack of shit. I mean, I don't know him personally. I'm just saying, stop abusing animals for the entertainment. Stop putting these sad fucking animals at the zoo for me to pay too much money to go watch my kids watch these things pray for death. That's neither here nor there. That's for a different show. Thank you again, Heath, for the selections. Patron Heath Benfield. This has been a really interesting test, and I like the different flavor of these episodes. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Guys, again, if you want to have us talk about your movies, patreon.com/filmalchemistpod. You can find us there for as little as $1 a month. You can join our community and just see what we're all about, guys. That's all you got to do. Once we get you in, we naked mole rat you, and you have to roll around in our urine and excrements, and then you're part of the hive.
I won't make you do that. It's fine.
Oh, Alex is too busy all of a sudden for the urine initiation.
Sorry, I'm being very Rodney. I'll make the bugs. That's
How
all.
dare you? Go back to your bush trimming. Since we were sponsored by Manscaped at one point. Guys, you can email the show.
Well done.
filmalchemistpod@gmail.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Film Alchemist. We're very easy to find on social media, and we love hearing from you guys. For the Film Alchemist, I'm Josh Griffey.
I'm Alex Dandino.